And here we go.
Alrighty,
Good
so
afternoon.
good afternoon. Thank you for joining me for another episode.
Number 5.
Number 5. So this week we're going to get into the Cannabis Control Board.
Okay.
And the Office of Exec. Well, excuse me. I'm sorry, I misspoke. We did that last week.
Right.
The Cannabis Control Board. Now we're getting into the powers and duties of the Office of Cannabis Management.
Okay.
We'll see how much time we have. If we can also get into the Chief Equity Officer and the Cannabis Advisory Board. But that's all that's left. That's the content that's left in the chapter.
And then comes the good stuff.
Well, then comes, if you want to give a taste of what comes next, we're probably going to skip Article 3, which deals with medical cannabis, and go directly into adult use cannabis. So, with that being said, Section 11, Functions, Powers, and Duties of the Executive Director, Office of Cannabis Management. You're going to find that this is a much shorter section than the Cannabis Control Board.
Okay.
This is subsumed under the Cannabis Control Board, so
Okay.
the Cannabis Control Board was fleshed out. They have a lot more power.
Yeah.
Basically, so let's get into it. The Executive Director, as authorized by and through this chapter, I'm sorry, let me tilt my phone. So, by and through this chapter, shall have the following functions, powers, and duties as provided for in this chapter. Starts the same way. That's how you explain this is what power this particular
Here's
office.
what we're going to talk about.
Right. To exercise the powers and perform the duties in relation to the administration of the Office of Cannabis Management. I find this provision a little confusing, so I'm wondering if you... As are not specifically vested by this chapter in or delegated by the Cannabis Control Board. I'm not sure what that means exactly, to be honest with you. I'm going to read it one more time.
Yeah, let's have that again.
To exercise the powers and perform the duties in relation to the administration of the Office of Cannabis Management, that's clear,
Right.
as are not specifically vested by this chapter in or delegated by the Cannabis Control Board, as are not specifically vested in. So what are they...
So basically
what are
they're
they
saying
talking
that,
about exactly?
this is the cannabis management, right?
Yeah, this is the Office of Cannabis Management, correct.
So they're saying you guys do everything that the Cannabis Control Board doesn't do.
Is that what they're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. That interesting. Thank you. that's. But this goes to what I was saying before, is that it's really, it's the plain language that rules and controls, and the legalese should not necessarily intimidate you. If you just take the time to examine it, a reasonably intelligent person should be able to understand it. So basically,
And I'm playing the part of a reasonably intelligent person.
Right.
Whether I actually qualify, that's a whole other conversation.
well, we're not gonna. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Some might argue. There's arguments on both sides.
Yes,
There's
the jury's still out in
There's
many
entries
cases.
on both sides of that ledger. Okay, so that's the power. That's the general power that they have. Okay. Number 2, to keep records in such form as they may prescribe of all registrations, licenses, and permits issued and revoked within the state. Such records shall be so kept as to provide ready information as the identity of all licensees, including the names of the officers and directors of corporate licensees and the location of all licensed premises. The executive director may contract to furnish copies of the records of licenses and permits of each class and type issued within the state or any political subdivision thereof for any license or permit, year or term of years not exceeding 5 years.
Okay.
Now, this seems like all it's saying is, they're going to keep records of all the different organizations that are, essentially either selling, manufacturing, or working with cannabis. But really what I think that provision means is that people need to begin to incorporate, like we're saying. It's not, I'm not pulling that out of nowhere. When I say that that's a first step towards meeting the state halfway, towards being in compliance with the statute, towards protecting yourself, toward getting a license down the line, incorporating is a very, very essential step.
Right. And it sounds to me like what they're saying in this particular section is, just like you have what you might think of as the liquor board or the DMV, this is the place that's going to keep the record of your marijuana license.
Exactly. So by incorporating, you're making their job easier.
Yes. And probably that's going to be one of the prerequisites to even becoming licensed in the first place.
That's very interesting. I mean, I'm hoping that that's how they go about the process of licensing, is that there's a set of objective criteria, and if you meet those criteria, you get approved,
Right.
regardless of, because remember, they can set the number or set no number at all.
Exactly.
So if you have, let's say, a number of applicants who have a market share, are incorporated, are paying or have escrow fund, wouldn't
Right.
it be in their interest
Yeah.
to grant more as opposed to less licenses because they're going to
And
get
it
more
certainly
taxable
wouldn't
revenue?
hurt. I would just say, not being a politician,
Yeah.
not being one of the people who drafted this legislature,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that you'd probably be more likely to be at the front of the line if you were incorporated and you were an actual credible,
Right.
business.
Right.
With
With a tax ID and all of
Exactly.
that.
And
And
like-
you can show
right.
that you have a staff and everybody's on the payroll. I mean,
Because just like getting a liquor license, you can't just open up a pop-up, boutique on the corner and get a liquor license. You got to be an established business.
and it costs, what is it, like $5 or $10 grand? That's actually a very interesting question. But do you have to be an established business to?
I would imagine you can't just walk up Johnny Joe off the street and get a liquor license.
There is a process, and
Yeah.
it is complicated.
And there's requirements.
I think this is going to probably ultimately be more complicated and more
Yeah.
difficult and more expensive. But
Now, in last week's episode, didn't they mention that this was going to be? There was some connection with the existing liquor.
yes, yeah. Well, that's where they're sourcing their talent
Right,
from.
right.
That's where the people are coming from. The office, the people in the Office of Cannabis Management are probably so. For collective bargaining purposes, there's some of the employees have to go through like a testing process where
Right.
the state tests them, and then they're categorized as a certain type of employee based upon. And then there's other people who are not.
Right.
Sean Cornell, they can just
Right.
hire to perform.
Right.
So there's definitely I forget the number, but many of them are going to be sourced directly from the liquor board.
Right.
So they know already how to process licenses,
Right.
how to organize
Exactly,
information.
exactly.
They don't have to train them, the governor doesn't have to come in and actually train the people.
Right.
To
And
their
it would
jobs.
make sense since this is another a substance which is dispensed for adult recreational use. Where else would you go? Well, the liquor board. That's what they've been doing for decades. So, as we try to figure out how would this work, you take that institutional knowledge. So
Right.
that would make sense.
Right, and as we continue to go, it's the same type of functions that you would expect from the liquor board, right? So the next point is to inspect or provide for the inspection of any premise where
There you
medical
go.
cannabis, adult use cannabis, hemp cannabis, or manufactured or sold,
Yeah.
right? Number 4, to prescribe forms of applications for licenses and permits under this chapter, and of all reports deemed necessary by the board. So they're the ones who the Cannabis Control Board is probably going to say, like, we need you to be asking, questions A, B, C, D, and E, and explaining to them what that form is supposed to look
Right.
like. But then they actually are the ones drafting the forms
Right.
and
Collecting the information, collating the data. Because as they said in the previous episode, that they were going to be starting in 2023, that they were going to be giving annual reports, right?
Yes, that's
So
right.
this is the group that's going to actually collect that information, which is going to comprise those annual reports.
You're right. I thought that was going to be the State Advisory Board, but what you're going to find is that that's actually a misnomer. The term State Advisory Board doesn't exactly explain what the State Advisory Board is doing. We're going to come back to that later.
Okay.
And we might not get to that this episode,
Okay.
so I don't want to go into too much detail. So to inspect or provide the inspection of any no, we said that already, right? To prescribe forms of applications for registrations, licenses, and permits under this chapter, and of all reports deemed necessary by the board. 7. To delegate the powers provided in this section to such other officers or employees as may be deemed appropriate by the executive director. So they can hire however many people they want.
Right.
If we turn out to be right, and that this actually ends up being like billions and billions of dollars as opposed to the the
few hundred
smaller
million that
that
they're
they
imagining.
thought it was going to be, then it's like, oh boy, we need to scale up. We need to hire more people. They can hire as many people as they want. Okay. To exercise the powers and perform the duties as delegated by the board in relation to the administration of the office as are necessary, including but not limited to budgetary and fiscal matters. Apparently they have authority over the finances. I would think that the Cannabis Control Board itself, being the superior entity, would have exclusive control over the budget, but apparently that's not true. So there's a balance of power there.
Okay.
To enter into contracts, memorandum of understanding, and agreements to effectuate the policy and purpose of this chapter. 10. To advise and assist the board in carrying out any of its functions, powers, and duties. That seems obvious, but
Right.
basically number 10 just means whatever you guys need,
Yeah.
will do. 11. To coordinate across state agencies and departments in order to research and study any changes in cannabis use and the impact that cannabis use and the regulated cannabis industry may have on access to cannabis products, public health, and public safety. Number 12, which is the last point, to issue guidance and industry advisories.
Now,
I thought but the last thing, just before you say something, I thought that would be the state advisory board to issue the advisories. But as you just said, they're the ones collecting the data, preparing the reports, preparing it for the legislature, preparing it for the cannabis board. What were
and
you
also in point 11 there, the penultimate point, it sounds like they're anticipating the critics that are saying, all right, you passed this law, but hey, you know, those people going to be smoking reefer. What's going to happen? And they're like, yeah, okay. So you know what? We're going to be taking a look at this. We're going to see, since this passed, do we have more drugged out people staggering like zombies on the streets of New York? Yes or no? And part of what this group is organized to do is to study that,
Yes,
and to make reports.
So I thought that would be the advisory board. That's not. It is. So essentially, the Office of Cannabis Management has probably, I wouldn't say the most power, but the most responsibility.
Right.
Okay.
In terms of day-to-day boots on the ground administrative duties.
They're the one inspecting the premises. They're the ones setting the quality control standards. They're the ones setting the language for the licenses, collecting the licenses. The board determines whether they approve it or
Right,
or
but
not.
they're the ones who are actually going to issue the paperwork, go
Yeah.
through the administrative folderol to actually make the licenses happen.
Yes, and I think they even are going to have like peace officers with guns showing up. Those are the people who will inspect the premises. They're going to be like special types of cops. They're not going to be NYPD, but I think they're going to have guns, and I think they can arrest you. And I think
Kind of like a state version of an ATF kind of thing, maybe.
yeah, well, that's exactly what it is, right?
Yeah.
I don't think the liquor board has the same power, or does it? They must, right? Does the liquor board have agents that can like?
I don't know, but I would imagine because you know, liquor licenses, you know, you start getting in bed with some kind of organized crime kind of types, you know. So I would imagine they have to have some sort of authority.
I don't know. I mean, but it did say that in the provisions that we read before that they're peace officers with the power to arrest. So whether the liquor board has that or not,
They will.
they will. Okay, now moving on. That's the Office of Cannabis Management. I think we understand essentially what they do and what their relationship is to the board. They're underneath the board, but they're
In some ways they're
parallel.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Section number 12, the Chief Equity Officer. Okay, so now last week,
Or last episode.
last episode, we didn't actually do the episode last week. That's right.
Right.
But when we began to talk about the Cannabis Control Board, I asked you, what would the powers and functions be? What would you want to see in the Cannabis Control Board? I'm not going to do that to you every time we approach a new section. Okay, but there are some sections that I'm going to do that for. The Chief Equity Officer is one of those sections.
Right.
So, what do you think, and it's not titled, the Chief Equity Officer is not titled, powers and functions the same way the Control Board and the Office of Cannabis Management was, but considering that it's in this section, it is presumed that, now they're describing, it's not going to be in another article where they're describing the powers and the functions. That is here. So, what should, two things, the functions and the power of the Chief Equity Officer. What do you think that should
Well, I would imagine, just hearing the description of the name, I would imagine that the Chief Equity Officer would be responsible for making sure that the licenses were fairly distributed.
Well, I think that's obvious, right? That essentially that the social equity applicant is a huge part of this legislation, and all of the language is replete with various provisions that are protecting that person as a class. So this is a provision where now we actually have, we don't have an entire office dedicated to ensuring the compliance with the social equity plan, but we do have a single person. So yes, that is his general power. I think or her. That's their general power. But let's now go into a little more detail.
Because like I said, that much is obvious by the name of the title.
How are they supposed to do that, though? You know, what kind of power should they have?
Now, do they? Because this is the office of
Cannabis management?
cannabis management that does the review and of revocations of licenses. Things
No,
like that, right?
well, they have the Cannabis Control Board
Cannabis
makes
Control
the
Board.
determination,
Right.
and then they can appeal,
Right.
say we disagree,
Right. So I would imagine you might go through the chief equity officer to initiate a review or an appeal or something like that. I'm just again. I don't know.
No. This is why
Right,
I'm
right.
asking you that. I think that's
yeah.
a great. I think that's a great idea. That
Yeah.
they might have some sort of power in the determination of whether a license is issued, or at least some sort of appellate power.
Right.
If you appeal, they could be brought
Right.
into the conversation. Something
Yeah.
like that.
What else would they do? I don't know. Maybe determine how the numerous licenses would be distributed in terms of by borough or section. I mean, obviously, we're looking in terms of whether you are a social equity applicant, but in addition to that, say, okay, Staten Island gets X number of licenses, and Brooklyn gets X number of licenses, and the Bronx gets X number of licenses out of the total number of licenses that are available.
Right. Okay.
Other than that, I can't really think of anything specific to that particular.
See, but what you're saying is what I was thinking was let's talk about now what it actually is,
Right.
what the powers actually are, and then we'll go back to what you said. Okay, so this is a very short. Section 12 is very short.
Okay.
There's only 3 paragraphs. The
Okay.
chief equity officer shall assist. No, excuse me. Chief Equity Officer. The board, by an affirmative vote of at least 4 members, shall appoint a Chief Equity Officer.
Okay.
Appointed by the board. The Chief Equity Officer shall receive an annual salary not to exceed an amount appropriated therefore by the legislature. We don't know what they're going to get paid.
Right.
And their expenses actually and necessarily incurred, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. That's who they are. That's how they get appointed. That's what they're getting paid.
Right.
We don't know exactly what they're getting paid. But
We'll pick the number. It'll be something reasonably fair.
right. I mean, I'm thinking it's probably going to be like in the 6-figure range, like
Yeah.
70, 80, 90 kind of thing. The Chief Equity Officer shall assist with the development and implementation of and ensure the Cannabis Control Board and the Office of Cannabis Management's continued compliance with the Social and Economic Equity Plan required to be developed pursuant to Article 4 of this chapter. Basically what you said, however, we haven't read Article 4 yet, so
Right,
you're not
right.
aware of that, but apparently in Article 4 they have to act, they're coming up with a plan.
Okay.
Okay, now does Article 4 spell out any additional powers that are not spelled out here? No, I don't think so.
Okay.
So this is really kind of the exclusive, this is the provisions exclusively that define the power of the
Right.
Chief Equity Officer. Okay. Number 2, remember there's only 3. The Chief Equity Officer shall establish public education programming dedicated to providing communities that have been impacted by cannabis prohibition with information detailing the licensing process and informing individuals of the support and resources that the office can provide to individuals and entities interested in participating in activity licensed under this chapter.
Oh, so basically, I'm the guy or gal who's going to let you know
Community
whether
outreach.
you are and how to qualify as a social equity applicant.
So the big part of their responsibilities, right, is going to be community outreach and working with the community and helping the social equity applicants actually
Apply
and yes.
and qualify in order to apply.
Number 3, the Chief Equity Officer shall provide a report to the board no later than January 1st, 2023. Again. And annually thereafter of their activities in ensuring compliance with the Social and Economic Equity Plan required to be developed pursuant to Article 4 of this chapter, and the board shall provide such report to the legislature. And that's it.
Okay.
Okay.
So basically, I got to show you that I'm actually doing my job.
Yeah, but they don't have any real power. You were talking about real power.
And
you were
they-
saying
yeah.
real things that they should
Like
be able to
determining
do.
how many, and they're not. That's not what they're going to do.
That's not what they're going to do. I'm surprised that they can't. I would at least give them like voting power in the board or in the Office of Cannabis Management. I would.
Well, no, it says the board appoints them.
Right.
Are they? Well, and then it doesn't say. I guess it would specifically say if they were. I was wondering, are they also a member of the board, or are they
No,
something?
they don't have any voting power.
So they're
in the
separate
board.
from the board.
They're separate from the board. The
Huh.
board is appointed by the.
So they're kind of like a figurehead,
Kind of.
despite the lofty title.
Despite the lofty title, their power is really informational toward the community. It's their power, and that's not power.
Right.
What is their power? I don't think
They're kind of more like the chief equity advocate than any sort of actual officer or anyone.
Shouldn't they have some sort of power if the board and the office is out of compliance? Shouldn't there be something that's spelled out? In
That's like if the president had no veto power and wasn't the one that actually signed bills into laws. Well, you can look at the bills and you can tell us what you think about it.
Yeah, but they're not. This isn't the president. The president is an elected official. I mean, I don't think they should have more power than the board. I don't. I mean,
some actual authority and power.
Something, man. Like if I don't know. But it's very limited, and it's really like you said. It's a better title would be the social equity advocate. Because they really, they're very limited in terms of.
However, for our purposes of enlightening the audience out here, knowing that there is someone that is what their role is going to be, that is someone because again, the whole reason we're doing this series is to educate you out there so that you can be a social equity applicant, so that you can get your license, so that you can qualify for this, so that you can become a legitimate business as a marijuana distributor or someone involved in the marijuana trade.
Yeah.
So knowing that there is a person you can go to, what do I have to do?
Yeah.
Well, that's the job of this chief equity officer.
Chief equity
is
officer.
to let you know as to whatever education. So they're not just going to say, well, figure it out for yourself, folks, and apply for a license. Their job is to let you know, here's what it takes to qualify for the license. Here's what you need to do. And it's sounding like what they're saying there, that they're going to actually be providing some education to inform you of how to become and qualify to be a social equity applicant.
If that all turns out to be perfectly true, then maybe everything that I said is should be taken with a grain of salt. Maybe
I'd still like to see somebody. I don't disagree with you. I'd still like to see somebody with that lofty a title with some actual,
something
powers. However, as long as everything that they say isn't just lip service, and the actual appointed chief equity officer actually not only has the ability to do that, but is zealously out there in the community doing these things, I'll take that.
I'll take it too. I mean, I think it's more than the other statutes have spelled out in the other jurisdictions. I don't think, I haven't read every statute, but I don't think there's a chief equity officer in the other, in at least most of them.
Yeah, they're not even addressing that as any sort of an official title. They're like, well, we're going to try to do what we can do. It's like, no, with intentions, we want some actual, what are you specifically going to do to ensure, rather than intending that it happens? Because that's why we're doing this whole series, because we don't want the out-of-town money to just come in here and buy everything.
Well, but then just to wrap this up, the one thing to recognize is you do not, the chief equity officer is not the one to, who's going to be responsible for ensuring the administration of the social equity plan. That's going to fall under the various branches of the board and the office. But so again, their role is really kind of educational, community outreach, and they're going to prepare reports to the legislature and the board annually. Okay, Section 13, rulemaking authority. Now, I think that this section should have. I don't know why they didn't put this into the functions and powers of the Cannabis Control Board, because isn't this the function and power of the Cannabis Control Board? Is making rules. So for organizational purposes, this is a little confusing, because now we're returning to essentially a power and function of the board, which is its rulemaking authority. Okay. The board shall perform such acts, prescribe such forms, and propose such rules, regulations, and orders as it may deem necessary or proper to fully effectuate the provisions of this chapter. Obviously, they make the rules.
Right. Otherwise, what are you doing?
Right, but like, what kind of rules are we talking about? Maybe, for instance, they'll say you can't sell cannabis within 100 feet of a school. That's the kind of rule that they could promulgate.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 2. The board shall, in consultation with the executive director and the chief equity officer, have the authority to promulgate any and all necessary rules and regulations governing the cultivation, governing everything. Then it goes on and on and on, basically, in terms of all the different, types of things.
Well, actually, go read that from cultivation.
Okay, so from to promulgate any all necessary rules governing the cultivation, manufacture, processing, transportation, distribution, testing, delivery, and sale of medical cannabis, adult use cannabis, and cannabinoid hemp and hemp extract, including but not limited to the registration of organizations authorized to sell medical cannabis, the licensing and or permitting of adult use cannabis cultivators, processors, cooperatives, micro businesses, distributors, laboratories, and retailers, and the licensing of cannabinoid hemp and hemp extract producers and processors pursuant to this chapter, including but not limited to.
Right. The reason I wanted you to read all of that, because that's what I suspected. Pay attention, you folks out there. Mm-hmm. Those of you out there doing your own thing, growing it however you want to grow it, this thing how you're growing it. Once this goes into effect, they're going to be the ones who are telling you book, chapter, and verse. How you can do everything from putting the seed into the ground, to packaging it, to distilling it, to deriving it. All are going to be on the rules that they create.
Well, they're going to come up with like a book, essentially. Yeah. And it's like, I don't know if any of you have ever worked in restaurants, but it's like, there's all the health code as it applies to restaurants.
Yeah.
It's a
it's
book.
A Bible.
It's a book, right? And, there's a lot in there that I think most restaurant owners aren't even aware of. Like you have to have when you wash dishes, the water has to be a certain temperature, right? Because bacteria can live.
Yep.
And they have authority to come into your restaurant and inspect how you're doing things, and if they don't like it, they can shut your lights out.
Done.
So in terms of like growing and what type of fertilizer are you using? How's that? So
So while this is a work in progress, look, we're two guys sitting here in front of a webcam every week talking to you. But those of you out there who are actually going to be watching this as time goes on, find out who these people are. They haven't set the rules yet. Mm-hmm. And especially those of you out there who are growing, who are packaging, distributing, deriving, manufacturing. You need to get in there and find out what the rules are going to be made, because once this becomes the law, you're going to be subject to those rules.
Well, and actually that's something you and I could do from a class advocacy standpoint as well. Like if we had enough clients in whatever the manufacturing space or the sales space and the growing space, and we we get them to explain to us what standards they would want to see codified in a rule book, then we can make a recommendation to the chief equity officer, for instance.
There you go.
That is relevant, right? Okay, so then that was section
13.
Well, yeah, no, but then there's a number of different. That's section 13, yeah, but there's a number of different provisions under part 1 in terms of the rule. Okay, prescribing forms and establishing application, reinstatement, and renewal fees. Again, we don't know how much it's going to cost yet.
Right.
Could be.
And now renewal makes sense. Reinstatement. That's sounding to me like you had a license, your license got revoked.
That's exactly what
now
that means.
You're trying to get it reinstated.
That's exactly what that means, yeah. C, the books and records to be created and maintained by all registered organizations, licensees, and permittees, including the reports to be made thereon to the office, and inspection of any and all books and records maintained by any registered organization, licensee, or permittee, and on the premises of any registered organization, licensee, or permittee. That's something that would probably scare the mortal shit out of most marijuana operators, because it's like, wait, what? Now I have to start keeping books and records?
We've been saying this from the beginning, folks. Incorporate, get a bank account, start keeping your records.
That's it.
Not when this, now.
Now,
because you need to get into the habits, because what they're saying is they gotta have the rights to come in and inspect your books. And if your answer is what books, you're done.
Yeah, but it's not like they're asking you to do something that's really...
No.
Yes, they're asking you to do something you haven't been doing up until this point, right?
Yeah.
Because when you're, engaged in a conspiracy to distribute drugs, you don't exactly want to...
You're not trying to write shit down when you're breaking the law.
No, you're trying to evade law enforcement. You're trying to evade, the executive. But now, so how do you begin that process of record keeping, etc.? Incorporate, right? And talk to an accountant, and have a basic idea of just essential accounting principles. They're not asking you to suddenly become, what?
This is why they're not looking for the first reports on this until 2023. This is July of 2021 as we're recording this. So they're saying, look, we're not even going to be ready for 2 years. So we're certainly not expecting all of y'all to be ready in August of 2021.
But if you can show them as soon as you apply for the license that you have, the corporate structure in place, you have the record keeping infrastructure in place, that's going to make you more.
The more you've already done in advance, the closer to the front of the line you're going to be.
Which is why we're doing this entire series. Study the statute and use it as a shield and a sword. To apply. Protect yourself by the statute, and when you apply for a license, you'll be in a better position to get approved.
Because look, at the end of the day, let's just be real talk. Forget all this legalese and stuff. It's all about a money hustle. This is America.
Yeah.
Born again capitalism.
Why do you think they're really legalizing this?
As just Sean says, we're going back to cash crops that this country was formed on back in the beginning. So this is about you positioning yourself to get your money hustle on. Back in the days when it was a black market thing, then it made sense not to keep records in case somebody kicks down your door.
Right.
But now it's legal, so you got to flip with the script. You got to because otherwise you're going to be locked out, not because you're breaking law, because you're not complying with the law.
Right.
It's not going to be a thing of you standing on the corner hooty hoo and selling dime bags. It's going to be straight up legit. And here's the thing, we will get into this in subsequent episodes, but everyone doesn't have to be selling it out of a bodega or a dispensary. One of the services we're going to look once we get our game in count is have a phone with a swipe card. You can do it with Bitcoin or whatever you want if you don't want to go into a FDIC bank. And start getting people to swipe their cards, man. First of all, you ain't got to be carrying around pockets full of cash.
Some people are starting to do that already.
Yes.
Street vendors and
make that money and sell dime bags and 20s, whatever have you.
Yeah.
But don't get cut out of the game just because you're doing it old school. This is not 1985. This is 2021. Swing with the times, man.
The other immediate benefit from incorporating is that you become eligible. We said this 2 weeks ago. You become eligible for zero interest loans from the state. Well, actually, only assuming that you meet the social equity applicant status.
Exactly.
But even if you don't, you might be eligible for loans from private banks.
Get that money.
Yeah.
Get that money.
Get that money.
And some of these loans may be forgivable. We're not making any promises out here. We're just saying that's what's up there because remember, we said from the very first episode, the government is doing this for two reasons. First of all, about that money, it's about tax revenues. California found this out. Colorado found this out. Evanston, Illinois has got money to make social reparations because of all the tax revenues. People smoke weed. People smoke a lot of weed. When weed is legitimate, they can tax that. That's a lot of tax revenue. The second thing is, there are people in the government who say, we know that the war on drugs was bullshit. We know that it's ruled out of black and brown people in jail for no justifiable reason, and now we're trying to balance that out. You want to call it white guilt, you want to call it government guilt, I don't care. Call it what you will. This is their opportunity for them to do good so they can go to sleep at night and not have to feel like bad guys. So part of what they're going to be doing is they're going to be bending over, maybe not backwards, but they'll be bending over like they're doing a limbo to balance the scales. And part of that's going to be that they're going to be giving low and no interest loans, and some of those loans are going to be forgivable just like during COVID.
Yeah.
So get it if you can, man. Especially, get some cash infusion, even if you have to pay back the loans.
Can you imagine what you could do with $20,000 right now?
Right now up front to build up your legitimate empire.
You could hire us, for instance, to go through whatever legal process you need to go through to help you with the application.
And that's cash
process.
right now, not out of your pocket, to put the cash in your pocket so that, come on, you hook this up right. What's paying back 20, 30 grand if you get yourself up to the point where you can be making that every week? Just saying.
Section D, and this goes to something we already said, but basically methods of producing, processing, and packaging cannabis. And then they go on and explain other language, just in terms of the standards of the manufacturing standards, cleanliness, sanitation, ingredients, quality control.
Right.
That's that's all subsumed under Section D. Section E. Security requirements for medical cannabis and adult use cannabis retail dispensaries and premises where cannabis products, medical cannabis, and cannabinoid hemp and hemp extract are cultivated, produced, processed, or stored, and safety protocols for registered organizations, licensees, and their employees. I don't know how many of you have been on the business end of a shotgun before, but when you're in a cash business, there's real risks. So apparently the state is saying you can't just do whatever you want to do.
Right.
They are going to be setting standards.
Right. And not only cash business, the cash you have and the products you have are both things people are going to want to rip you off for.
Yep. No, well, and I'm sure have been.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I think
Oh,
you
yeah.
expose yourself to less risk of violence selling marijuana than cocaine and heroin and other
But
things.
it's not risk-free.
But it's not risk-free, especially as you become more successful. It's like if you have a a dispensary or a
and if
or
you're in a
store.
stationary, legit place where
Yeah.
people know where you're going to be every day, and they know you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash and or product on you, that's a kick down door and a couple of shotguns in hand away from somebody driving away with all of that shit. So yeah, you're gonna have to make sure that your establishment is secure. Just like if I have a check cashing place.
Yeah.
Obviously, I got to have security. I've got hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, and then I've got the checks that I just cashed in, which are.
But we'll see what those security procedures look like. I don't think they're going to tell you that you need to beef up like a bank or a check cashing place with glass, bulletproof
just
glass.
reasonable security to prevent the
That's
obvious.
something you should be thinking about. That's something you should have been thinking about before anyway.
Right. Right.
Like
if you've been selling weed, you're looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, so you should be thinking about security, measures and provisions and things that you could be doing at this point. That's not priority number one, but it's definitely something to be.
I'd say it in the top 5.
Yeah. Okay. Number F. Hearing procedures and additional causes for cancellation, suspension, revocation, and or civil penalties against any person registered, licensed, or permitted by the board. There's some language in other parts of the statute that seem to suggest that if there's that the Supreme Court might have jurisdiction to hear certain types of cannabis-related issues. However, I think most of it is going to be done by the board, and it's going to be relatively informal procedures where the traditional rules of evidence are relaxed a little bit, and a lot of people are going to be probably showing up without attorneys, and just saying, hey, why'd you take my license away?
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera. So they're going to be the ones to set the hearing.
Yeah. And especially in the first few years, I would imagine that it's going to be a work in progress. So they're going to be figuring out how to do this fairly, and so that they're not just going around yanking people's licenses, but also they don't want the cracks to be too wide for people to be slipping and sliding through. Mm-hmm. So they're going to be working at, are we too lenient? Are we too stringent? And the first couple of years, they're going to be figuring that out, which is why it would make sense to have it be in a more informal process.
Yeah, but it's something that the lawyer needs to be mindful of, because every court kind of has its own rules, regulations, forms that you have. Surrogate's court is different from criminal court, is different from family court, is very different from federal court.
Right.
The Supreme Court being kind of very special in terms of their rules and procedures. So, the Cannabis Control Board is going to have its own hearing procedures that the lawyer is going to want to be mindful of. The cannabis operator doesn't need to be too concerned with that at this point. Okay. Number G. The circumstances, manner, and process by which an applicant, registered organization, licensee, or permittee may apply to change or alter its previously submitted or approved owners, managers, members, directors, financiers, or interest holders. Now, the reason why you have to, and why you want to incorporate, so that you can basically explain to disclose to the board, these are the officers, these are the managers, these are the financiers, etc. The reason why they want to be so mindful of that is because they want to remember, nobody on the board, nobody in the office, nobody on the advisory committee can have any interest in a marijuana business in New York State. Actually, that's interesting. I wonder if they could have interests in businesses
in another state,
but not in New York.
Right.
I think.
And here's also the other thing related to those of you out here watching this. According to the rules, you can only have one type of license. If you're a grower, you can't be a distributor. If you're a distributor, you can't have a license to be a retailer. If you're a retailer, you can't have consumption license.
There's some rule, but I wonder if there's a way around that.
Well, this is what I'm hearing, and again, I will deny this in a court of law. This is why you're going to want to make sure it's set up separate LLCs. So you can have a controlling, but the people in this LLC, none of them are the people in this LLC, regardless of the fact that if behind the scenes you have interest in all of them, as long as you set them up so that legitimately, these are separate entities. This is something you're going to want to think of in advance.
Well, that's why you need to talk to a lawyer, right? Because how do you set the sometimes setting up is an LLC even the best corporate structure to set up in?
Might it be a Class S or Class C corp instead of an LLC? These are things that should have to be determined.
And it depends on a number of different factors. How many officers are there in the corporation? What's your projected revenue? You know, these are the things that you need to be thinking about right now.
And here's something, and I don't want to dwell on this too much though, but obviously one of the major differences of an LLC and any kind of corporation is the ability to sell stock. Since we're talking, we're not just talking about being able to sell weed and not get arrested for it. We're talking about going legit and leaving behind a financial legacy that you can pass on to 2 and 3 generations into the future. We've never had the opportunity to think of, wait, my weed selling, my weed growing, my weed consuming enterprise could be something I could sell stock in?
No,
I could grow as a business?
And actually, I don't want to dwell too deeply on this, but I think most of you guys are kind of like, oh, well, this was a nice little hustle for me, but now the real adults are going to come in and control the industry. What I'm saying is, no, you are the real adult.
Yes.
And if you take a few steps, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to take a piece of this pie.
Right.
You know?
Right.
The only difference is that the established venture capitalists have already done this before. They have money in the bank, and they can kind of buy their way into the market. Whereas, you know, you have to do things that are a little bit outside of your current wheelhouse.
Yeah. But you put in the fucking sweat equity. Yeah. You've been out there on the streets for years.
Yes.
You got the clientele and the market share, and you deserve to be the ones who make the profit.
Not just deserve. I think you're the ones in the best position to manage that business.
Yeah.
I have more confidence in the people who have put in the sweat equity and who have actually been on the streets for the past 20 years than the venture capitalists. So I think the reason why I'm doing this is I think they're actually more competent than, and not less competent. Okay, so number 3. Now, number 3 talks about, the board shall promulgate rules and regulations that are designed to. I wonder if that shouldn't have been point 1, right? Because it's explaining this is essentially the type, the rules and regulations are designed to do, and then it spells out all the A through H. Prevent the distribution of adult use cannabis or cannabis product to persons under 21 years of age, including the modification of tobacco vaping products for use with cannabis. They mentioned that last part because tobacco vaping has become much more popular among high schoolers.
I'm not smoking, I'm just vaping.
Well, I think, I started smoking both tobacco and cannabis in high school. I wish I hadn't. And, I think the state and society generally should do everything in its power to keep this out of the hands of kids. So, yes, the fact that that's the first point up there, I think is A-okay. B, prevent the revenue from the sale of cannabis from going to criminal enterprises. Well, I mean, I wonder how much ties cannabis really has to other facets of organized crime, and I think it's very limited. I don't think the Italian...
I wouldn't know.
I've never read anything to that effect, but you're right, I wouldn't know either. In any event, they don't want this to become like some mafia front business. They want this to be, and I want this to be, a legitimate, and we want, we're trying to create the 5 Bro Social Equity Alliance to manage the distribution of discretionary revenue for the cannabis operators so that they're making charitable contributions into the community. Yeah. I don't see organized crime syndicates doing that.
Right. And as I say, I have this saying, and soon to be a t-shirt, criminals go to jail, gangsters go legit. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about y'all out there, y'all weed-slinging gangsters to go legit, to establish legitimate businesses, and again, to have a legacy to leave behind to your children and grandchildren, to grow a business and not just to establish a criminal record.
Prevent the diversion and inversion of cannabis from this state to other states and from other states into this state insofar as cannabis remains federally prohibited. So this is why I think this is ripe for the Supreme Court to take a look at this right now, because it's legal in 23 states. So if it was only legal in 2 states, it would be easy for the United States, for the government to say, you cannot mail a cannabis package from New York to California, even though it's legal in both of those states.
Right.
It's you can grow it and smoke it in your state and stick to your own little territory. But now that it's legal in 23 states, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
What are they going to do? I can't mail this to, So I really think that,
and this is why this is little tales out of school here. We have discussed off camera, setting up a web presence where people would be able to sell and distribute weed online. And one of the things, my take was initially that we should do it, as it says, enter New York only. And John was like, but wait, there's all these other states. And I was like, yeah, look, I don't have a problem with that. However, as this section just alluded to, what if we're, say, the state that we're getting it from, California, Colorado, one of the other sundry states, but then the feds want to come in with the bullshit of, well, it crossed state lines, and it's like, wait, really?
Well, okay, so I actually didn't want to talk about, well, for a couple of reasons, I don't really want to get too deeply into business strategy, because we're trying to talk about the legislation, and I want to, we could really go into a number of different tangents. The other reason why is because that's our idea, and nobody else is doing that right now, and, I don't want to necessarily, but I do want to touch upon it a little bit, and what I think would happen, worst case scenario, is if you were to sell marijuana from New York State to another jurisdiction where it's legal, and the feds felt that was they would ask you to stop. I don't think you're going to jail for that.
Okay.
I don't think that that's going to be something, unless you're really violating the statute in some sort of other manner, or being just kind of reckless and egregious. I mean, I know someone got arrested recently for bringing a bunch of marijuana on a plane in Florida, but first of all, it's illegal in Florida.
Yeah, and dude, these were briefcases full of weed. This wasn't a little bit of stuff. And then they want to pretend, oh, I didn't pack that. Really, this is your luggage with your luggage pass, but you didn't pack this briefcase full of weed. Come on now.
But this is important. We do need to dwell on this for just a minute, because basically it's saying that they're supposed to promulgate rules intended to prevent us from
interstate
trafficking, where insofar as it remains federally prohibited. But what is that I don't see how they could actually implement that in any sort of reasonable way. I think they, at this point, all they can really do is legalize it nationally.
Because it makes me wonder, okay, so I'm going to use the United States Postal Service, which is an independent federal entity, and I'm going to order it from Colorado, and I'm going to have it sent to New York. I'm not doing anything in any of the intervening states. So as you're saying, it's legal in Colorado, it's legal in New York. I could ship any legal product from one state to another.
Including alcohol.
Right. But because, exactly, I could order bottles of wine.
Yeah, but aren't there special rules when you're shipping alcohol and tobacco? Like, isn't there? I think there are. Like, it's not so simple. You can't just... I mean, it depends what you're doing. I think you can mail your mother a bottle of wine.
No, come on. My sister was having, bottles and cases of wines ordered at UP. I don't know if she was using the United States Postal Service, but she was using, like FedEx.
But the businesses that were shipping it probably had to meet certain legal requirements or whatever.
Probably.
Like if you're selling art on Amazon or books or whatever, there's no special considerations. I think ultimately there will be, but at this point there is not, and I think you're in relatively good shape if you wanted to be selling.
We'll stick a pin in that, and we'll come back to that in a future episode. But now let's go on.
But it's unresolved, and it's something that we need to.
And even they're saying, it's like, you know what? Right now, we don't want to mess with the feds, so we're going to keep it into New York. And I think that's what they're acknowledging. They're like, we've entertained the concept of one state to another, but we don't want the feds, messing with us, so we're just going to keep it in-house for now.
This provision is funny. Prevent cannabis, hemp, cannabinoid hemp, and hemp extract activity that is legal under state law from being used as a cover or pretext for the trafficking of other illegal drugs or other illegal activity. If I was going to use something as a pretext for selling illegal drugs, it probably would not be marijuana.
Exactly.
It would be like, I don't know, cat food or children's formula or something like that.
Cornmeal.
Right.
Or baking powder.
Okay, so yeah, and I don't think anybody's really doing that. So I don't think that's
So let me do this deal in this substance which just got legalized to do illegal shit. Because that makes a lot of sense.
Inform the public about the dangers of driving while impaired and the public health consequences associated with the use of cannabis. Those are two very different things. Okay, first of all, I'm not convinced that cannabis impairs driving. It's certainly not as much as alcohol. Okay.
Yeah, not as much as alcohol. Unquestionable. Not at all.
Well, I would have to see the studies, and I'm not confident that there should be laws making it illegal to smoke marijuana and drive. I don't know that. You would have to show me the science demonstrating that cannabis impairment really...
Well, my joke has always been that when you're on the highway, you can tell the stoned drivers because they're the ones who are driving 10 or 15 miles under the speed limit.
Right, and
And I don't think I've ever driven intoxicated under alcohol because I didn't start driving until I was 25, and I don't have the reflexes that somebody who started driving at 12 with their tractor on their grandpa's, farm. I'm not going to say that I never drove stoned. I didn't do it very often. I was always a little paranoid. I was one of those people, driving 35 in the 50-mile-an-hour zone. So I'm not going to say that there's no effect.
I didn't say there's no effect. I just don't think it's that important or it's that big of a deal.
Okay, and here's where I'd say in for a penny, in for a pound. Yes, I would like to see to the extent that it affected you, but I would prefer that was a provision that, wait till you get to where you're going. Or, just like, you can go to a bar, you can drink, you can drive home after you drank. Just not immediately after you drank. Make sure that you fucking sobered up before you get behind the wheel. So similarly, don't take a hit off of a fucking gas mask and get blazed and then immediately get behind the wheel of your car and fucking get on the highway.
I lead a reckless life. What can I say?
Whatever you're doing sitting at your Game Boy is one thing. When you get on the fucking road, you're in 2 tons of death. And you have a responsibility to everybody else that's on the road.
All right. Okay, fine. But the thing that I'm saying, that there's really 2 parts to this provision. One is cannabis intoxication on the road, and the other is the health consequences of cannabis generally. The second part I do think is important. Inform the public about the dangers or the public health consequences associated with the use of cannabis. Yeah, I think that needs to be studied more. I think cannabis abuse disorder is a real thing.
Yeah.
And the public needs to be educated, not through fear tactics.
No,
but
just like you said, through show me the science and let's have an adult conversation about it.
So that's very good. All right. Prevent the growing of cannabis on public lands. What? Is that really... You know what I was reading in Wikipedia recently? We're going to digress for a minute. When they first prohibited cannabis, and when was it? What year was that?
Jesus.
Is it the 20s or the 10s?
Might have been then, way back when.
In New York, it was growing all over, wild, all over the 5 boroughs. Like, you know how you see, in abandoned lots, you see
because
various...
it's fucking weed.
You see various types of plants just kind of growing everywhere. So there used to be... cannabis growing up, so they created a government agency to just destroy all the marijuana that was growing publicly all over the
They just don't want nobody to have fun.
I really don't think that we need to take steps that the government needs to take steps to prevent the growing of cannabis on public lands. What would the consequences be if that would just unmitigate? I don't think there would be any.
It'd be even more ridiculous than it is here now.
Yeah.
And just closing, we're in Chelsea, New York, as we're making this recording, and as I said, it's July of 2021. So it's been a couple of months now that it's been fully legal.
I should know this off the top of my head, but honestly, I don't. It's been a few months.
Yeah, since early June, I think.
You think so, right? Yeah, that's when it passed. Yeah.
Yo, folks, you literally
everyone
can't. Everyone.
Everyone.
You can't walk a block in any direction and not pass people who are smoking weed.
I mean, I think it might be half of. I think it might be half of the city that's.
It is crazy because I suspected that some people were getting high. The extent to which New Yorkers, all ages, social status, it doesn't matter. Soccer moms, retirees, straight-laced, corporate-looking dudes, and it's on the streets, it's on the bike paths, it's in the park. They're just sitting there. I was riding my bike a couple of weeks ago. I ride about 5.5 miles. I was doing a little workout and I ride back. So I'm on the water on the east side of Manhattan, and I smell the weed. There's this guy and his girlfriend. I'm like, okay, they twisted one up. I get done with my exercise, look around. The guy's got a freaking hookah, a water pipe with the fucking thing.
Oh yeah, of course. You haven't been to Washington Square Park recently. They're selling it on tables next to the cops. Next to bongs out, just we've been using more expletives this episode than usual, but 0 fucks were given on that day, man. Like
Suns
nobody
out, bongs out.
Nobody. It's just so. All right. But so what if they grow it on public lands? I really don't care. I don't think the government should care. Inform the public about the prohibition on the possession and use of cannabis on federal property. It's against the law on federal property in New York.
Yes.
In the city of New York, okay?
Yeah, once the feds have authority, it's a totally different jurisdiction.
In other words, if you are on a federal court, like you're on the street and you're smoking down this, do not sit down on the steps of the federal courthouse and spark up. I think probably what they would do is they would just tell you to move on. Yeah. But technically, that's against the law.
Yeah, don't go on a military base.
No.
Or anything like that.
H. Establish application, licensing, and permitting processes which ensure all material owners and interest holders are disclosed, and that officials or other individuals with control over the approval of an application, permit, or license do not themselves have any interest in an application, license,
no silent partners.
So I said that, but that we discussed that a few provisions ago. So there's a redundancy here. It's like they want the reason why.
They're like, no joke, folks. We're really saying nobody on the board has any interest. Did we mention that? By the way, did we mention that nobody on the board?
The decision-making process cannot be corrupt. It would be very hard for the decision-making process to be corrupted, given this statute.
And they are really emphasizing and re-emphasizing this point.
Number 4, the board, in consultation with the Department of Agriculture and Markets and the Department of Environmental Conservation, shall promulgate necessary rules and regulations governing the safe production of cannabis, including environmental and emergency standards and restrictions on the use of pesticides and best practices for water and energy conservation. Interestingly, we should do another series just on like current events cannabis, but the state just passed a provisional piece of legislation allowing farmers to grow until they get a license. Isn't that consistent with what we're telling the retailers and manufacturers? Don't wait until you get a license, start taking action now.
Especially those of you who are in upstate New York or those of you who are out in the suburbs, whatever. You got a little patch of farmland, especially if you've been just paying the taxes and you haven't been growing anything that's giving you a profit. Just saying. Regardless of how you feel about weed, this is now a legitimate cash crop.
Every plant is worth thousands of dollars. Yeah. So if you have 20 plants, you have $20,000
So if you've got some acres of scrubland that you're not growing any corn or tomatoes or whatever the hell, doesn't take much to grow weed.
No, and basically the provisional legislation would it's hands off at this point. So like Cornell said, if you are a farmer, go ahead.
And especially if, let's say, you weren't a farmer, you're just somebody, your parents or your grandparents, they had some farmland and you inherited it, and you're like, oh, what the hell am I going to do with this? I'm an accountant. I'm a corporate person.
You can make a quick $100 grand.
Yeah. So rather than it being a drain on you in terms of the tax money for it, or you thinking of selling it off, come on.
Yep.
Turn that into money. Just saying.
Number 5, we've encountered similar provision in other areas. Emergency rules and regulations. So we're going to. This is a long part. Well, it's not that long, but we're going to skip it. Okay, there's very special rules around emergency types of rules. I don't know.
Do they get into what they mean by emergency?
See, that's what I thought would be interesting if they actually defined the type of emergency that might, the reasons why they might be spelling this out, but they don't, right? So it's just the procedures around which.
In the case of an emergency, which we are not going to specify yet.
This is what they do. This is the process. This is how long the emergency rule will take effect. This is so there's very special rules and provisions around emergency rules, but I don't know. And hopefully, we won't have any emergencies. If we do, then we'll return to the legislation and analyze it. But
we're really trying to bring you guys the relevant information for you to get out there and get your legit hustle on.
Yeah. Right. We're more concerned about explaining the legislation to you in such a way that you can get your legitimate hustle on.
Yeah, and that's why we sort of bypass the medical marijuana, because if you're into medical marijuana, you're already a dispensary, you already got a license.
The license for the medical marijuana before was like $300 grand. Did you know that? Well, that we're not. By the way, we're not. That's not going to. First of all, for the social equity and the social and economic equity applicants, we have to come up with a shorthand for that. Well, by next week, stay tuned.
Yeah. See ya.
There's a sliding scale, so they might not even charge you anything, but they're certainly not going to charge you money like that. Yeah. However, the medical guys, I mean, they have lawyers, they have doctors, they have people on board. They don't. So we're not going to dive into that. We're going to go directly to adult use cannabis in section 4. Article 4. All right. So now we're going to the next section is the State Cannabis Advisory Board. All right, this is the last provision in this section.
Right.
Okay, so I suggest that we try to move through this. Okay, and then next week we'll get into Article 4. As I said, the State Cannabis Advisory Board is a lot more than just an advisory board. This is the interest. This is what they're actually ultimately in control over, is the money that's collected and how it's distributed, which is a very interesting question. Like in terms of how this the state collects taxes in a number of different ways. One is through the Department of Taxation. And two, it's various types, sales tax. There's various types of taxes that are collected in various markets and industries. So we've explained kind of how
levies at the ports and things of this nature.
Right. So the State Cannabis Advisory Board is ultimately the one responsible for how those funds are going to be dispersed. So they're not just making like advisory notes and opinions. They have probably in the sense that they're responsible for the money, they have the most power out of the various branches.
They're the hands on the purse strings.
Right. So the State Cannabis Advisory Board or Advisory Board is established within the Office of Cannabis Management and directed to work in collaboration with the Cannabis Control Board and the Executive Director to advise and issue recommendations. So they do have some advisory roles on the use of medical cannabis, adult use cannabis, and cannabinoid hemp and hemp extract in the state of New York. And this is the big end, shall govern and administer the New York State Community Grants Reinvestment Fund pursuant to Section 99-KK of the State Finance Board. I wonder if they should, if you're gonna, it seems like it should be one or the other. You should be responsible for the money or responsible for making advisory opinions. But they're...
and what's that organization again? The Community Grants and...
Well, I'm going to actually spell that out.
Okay.
So they shall govern and administer the New York State Community Grants Reinvestment Fund pursuant to Section 99-KK of the State Finance Law. What is that? All right, that is a special fund that was established through the statute related to the cannabis, and I'm gonna read it right. I'm gonna read part of it right now. It's actually a long and complex piece of legislation about how the money is going to be collected and distributed. But Section 99-KK, New York State Community Grants Reinvestment Fund, there is hereby established in the joint custody of the State Comptroller and the Commissioner of Taxation and Finance a special fund to be known as the New York State Community Grants Reinvestment Fund. Such fund shall consist of all revenues received pursuant to provisions Section 99-2 of this article, and all other monies credited or transferred thereto from any other fund or source pursuant to law. Which means it's not just cannabis. There's other areas that is coming. Nothing contained in this section shall prevent the state from receiving grants, gifts, or bequests for the purpose of this fund as defined in this section and depositing them into the fund according to law. So, for instance, if we get the 5-Borough Social Equity Alliance up and running, we might want to just make charitable contributions to that fund. The fund shall be governed and administered by the State Cannabis Advisory Board, the section we're on right now.
Boom.
Right, set out under Article 2 of the Cannabis Law, what we're reading right now. Okay, I'm going to read Part 4 because it explains how the monies are supposed to be distributed. The monies in such fund shall be awarded by the State Cannabis Advisory Board and administered and dispersed by the Office of Cannabis Management and or the Urban Development Corporation to provide grants for qualified community-based nonprofit organizations and approved local government entities for the purposes of reinvesting in communities disproportionately affected by past federal and state drug policies. Such grants shall be used, including but not limited to support job placement, job skills services, adult education, mental health treatment, substance use disorder treatment, housing, financial literacy. Goes on to list various types of community engagements. All right. The grants from this program may also be used to further support the social and economic equity program created by Article 4 of the Cannabis Law and is established by the Cannabis Control Board. Okay. So
now, one thing that comes to mind, because remember, we discussed a couple episodes ago that we were seeing that there were some naysayers about this. That, well, the folks with money have already got in. The licenses are going to be prohibitively expensive. They're not giving enough of the licenses to the people disproportionately affected.
Right.
It sounded to me like this is saying, regardless of who gets the licenses, a significant portion of the revenue generated by these taxes is going to go into this reinvestment fund.
Yeah.
And from other sources. And that's going to be determined, and it's specifically designed to focus on the communities.
Yep, that's right.
Disproportionately affected.
Yep, and we're going to go into more detail about that. The only thing I'll say now as a comment is this is probably an area where the chief equity officer might be able to flex his muscles a little bit. Like he might be able to, or Zer, or as the case or there. He might be able to, approach the advisory board and say, we need to direct funds here. Or might have some influence there.
And this is why we're going to want to pay attention to who fulfills that role and make sure that we're in communication with them. Something I say, just a little digression here, and I say this about politics, that voting is just table stakes. It does not make a difference if you are not politically active. And this is where, forget the city council or whatever, this is where being in communication with the person who represents your interests is important. There's going to be a single person, a single point of contact, a social equity officer who is, among other things, going to have this advisory capability. That's somebody you're going to want to have that number on speed dial. You're going to want them to know you by face and name. You're going to want to visit their office. You're going to want to shake hands with them. You're going to want to make sure that when they get an email from you, when they get a phone call from you, they know you and the organizations, the community, the interests that you represent.
And I think what you're saying more deeply than that is now is time to take an interest in politics and to stop having just this apprehension and distrust of the government.
Well, the government's going to...
This is the government. These people right here. Okay,
Yes.
people you can call up on the phone, people you can approach. So it's not some behemoth, that is totally divorced from, your community.
Yeah.
These are people from your community.
Yeah. And what has the government done for you lately? This is what they're going to do. So make sure they do it for you.
So it gets more interesting. Paragraph 2. The State Cannabis Advisory Board shall consist of 13 voting appointed members, along with, this is very interesting, a representative from the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Department of Agriculture and Markets, the Office of Children and Family Services, the Department of Labor, goes on, the Department of Health, the Division of Housing and Community Renewal, the Office of Addiction Services and Supports, the Department of Education. So that's 8. So the 8 members, they don't vote, from those various government agencies are going to be part of the non-voting members of the Cannabis Advisory Board to say, hey, we need this, please give us this money, etc. Okay, so as non-voting ex officio members, that's what that means.
Okay.
That they don't get to vote.
But they do get to comment.
Yes, I wonder if they should be allowed to vote. They must have really thought this through, and I suppose the reason why they can't vote is because you want to ultimately check and balance the power.
Right. But they do get to say, okay, you're collecting this and you got this reinvestment fund. Here's this communities, and why have these communities, not only have they been disproportionately affected by the marijuana laws, they got the shittiest schools. I'm the Department of Children, I'm the Department of Education. Let's start funding these schools so that from the egg they can get better education, so that they can get better jobs.
They're making an effort to blue line the red line, like we're talking about.
Thank you.
They're really, at least it seems that way.
Yes.
From this.
On paper, this would, remember, this is just on paper, folks. None of this happens until it happens. That's why we're taking the time every weekend to sit here and make these recordings. We have to make this happen. Blue line the red line. That's not just a phrase. Make that happen, folks. Make them blue line the goddamn red lines.
Yes.
Don't sit there and say what they ought to do. Make them do it. They're saying we're putting in law our intention to do it. Make this gobbledygook, this legalese, make this the reality. You have the power to do that. We're just two guys sitting in front of a webcam. Okay, you, all of the people out there watching it, you're the ones who have the power to make it. Let's make this happen. So 20 years from now, we're saying, hey, remember when it was all screwed up and it didn't happen like this? Look at what we got done.
And it's not an adversarial type of thing. This is not like so it's not what they were doing in the 60s in terms of fighting for social justice, getting arrested, getting beaten. No. It's just a matter of organizing yourself and being adults and being professionals and keeping records and managing your business the way you should, so that you make more money and you're acting in your own best interests.
and
That's all they're
say,
asking
hey,
for here.
so you guys collected $1.5 billion in marijuana tax revenues last year. I have a suggestion for $300 million of that. Here's this school district and whatever, and you got the reinvestment board there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to talk to the head of the Department of Education. I'm going to talk to the local principals in my area, and we're going to see what we need to do
And
to get our cut
now
of that.
you can see yourself as a tax-paying citizen.
Yes.
Now you're not a criminal. Now
Yes.
you're part of a community that is bringing millions, if not billions, of dollars to the state
Yes.
to distribute into the community.
And now the phrase "our tax dollars at work" takes on a completely different meaning.
And you have an ownership interest, an equity interest in the government, in
That
the
word
community. Right. Okay, so how are these people appointed? The governor shall have 7 appointments. The temporary president of the Senate and the Speaker of the Assembly shall each have 3 appointments to the board. The members shall be appointed to each serve 3-year terms in the event of a vacancy. Okay, then it goes into basically kind of the rules and regulations concerning appointments, etc.
Yeah.
But basically, there's 13 voting members, and then there's 8 ex officio non-voting members. 3. Advisory board members shall have statewide geographic representation that is balanced and diverse in its composition. Appointed members shall have an expertise in public and behavioral health, substance use disorder treatment, effective rehabilitation. This gets very interesting, by the way. Effective rehabilitative treatment for adults and juveniles, homelessness and housing, economic development, environmental conservation, job training and placement, criminal justice, and drug policy. Wait for it. Wait for it. Further, the advisory board shall include residents from communities most impacted by cannabis prohibition, people with prior drug convictions.
Say that again.
People with prior drug convictions. Wait for it. The formerly incarcerated, and representatives from the farming industry, cannabis industry, and organizations serving communities impacted by past federal and state drug policies. The only thing that confused, when I first read that, it blew me away. I'm like, wait a second. They're going to put like ex-convicts who, in charge of millions of dollars. Yeah, that's exactly what they're going to do. Yeah. I mean, they are literally blue lining the red line here. They're saying people we threw in jail, now we're putting them in now we're...
Because who would know better how to balance the wrongs than the people who were wronged in the balance?
I mean, they just thought this through. And really, the only thing that doesn't make sense to me is representatives from the cannabis industry. I thought I thought you can't have representatives from the cannabis industry in the control board, in the advisory board, or...
Well, no, I think what they said is that they can't have a financial interest.
They can't have a financial interest in the cannabis industry.
No, they can't have a financial interest in the licenses that are going to be distributed under this legislation.
But if they're in the cannabis industry in New York, won't they have that financial? Won't that conflict of interest be there? Just per se on its face?
No. They're not members of the control board.
They're not members of the control board. They're members. Right, you're right. They're not. But they're members.
They're just advisors.
No, but they're not just advisors. They're responsible for the money, how the money gets distributed. So in other words, let's say I have a marijuana company. I've applied for a license from the state. I've gotten it. Now I'm a member appointed by the governor in the advisory board. Isn't there a conflict of interest there?
Well, I mean, look, but where are they going to be reinvesting this? They're not going to be investing it in the marijuana people. They're going to be investing it in housing and education and job training and in.
I agree. I don't even think the board or the Office of Management should close their doors to members of the. I don't think.
But they've done it for whatever reason. The illusion of impropriety and conflict of interest accusations. I understand why they've done it that way.
I do too, but I'm more of like kind of a laissez-faire. And I wouldn't. They've eliminated any potential for a conflict of interest. Yeah. I would be more comfortable, even if my comfort level wouldn't be violated if there was a little bit of. But no, here
because they're saying, look, we're really trying to get this shit done, and so we're trying to anticipate all the ways the naysayers could come at us, and we're trying to nip that in the bud before it even gets into bloom. And I understand it. Is it a little astringent? Yes, it is.
But isn't that an interesting provision, man? Those are the people who are going to be responsible for distributing the funds.
And again, I really am going to send a link to this episode to the folks that I know in that article that were specifically referenced. I'm not trying to call anybody out.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I understand their initial hesitation, but This was an article written by people who hadn't done what we're doing here, which is reading this. They were going on their assumptions. And again, as a 60-year-old black man growing up in New York, I understand their cynicism. That's why I said yes when Sean asked me to be a partner in all of this. That's why I have specifically not read the legislation, because each week I get to be here. I get to be the avatar for the uninformed person. So I get to hear what it's saying.
But I think what those people probably approached like, I'm not going to sit down and read a piece of code.
No, I don't even
right?
think that they thought about it.
They're
just said,
intimidated.
I know. No, they probably just yeah, blah blah blah, same old bullshit that we always hear. What they're going to do, and until we sit here and read this out, I would have been inclined, based on the past, to believe it. Except now that we're seeing this, is like, actually, my friends, actually, my people, no, because they understand because they've lived the same past you've lived, and they understand why you were cynical, and that's why. I mean, when you're telling me that they're going to put formerly incarcerated people on this advisory board, they are listening to you. Now, is this going to stop people with money from getting closer to the front of the line in terms of getting the licenses? Not 100%. But there's even other things in this provision to do that. And this is saying, okay, even if they get to the front line, because remember, I think it was a couple of episodes ago, they said that one of the things they're going to do in their first review is look at how the licenses will have actually been distributed,
and
if
giving
necessary.
Themselves the power
to say, too many of the investment capital motherfuckers jump to the front of the line. Sorry, we're going to balance this out a little bit.
Which I found questionable, but you see how protected as a class the social economics.
They are really looking to address those. So stay cynical, okay? Stay cynical. Because that's what's going to keep their fat to the fire. Because again, this is all intentions. This is all words on paper. None of this is reality until it's real.
Right.
So we're going to need y'all out there
to take responsibility.
Yes. But don't just sit there with your arms crossed on the sideline saying, "Yeah, right." Take an active part. First of all, from an economic benefit. Go out there and get some of that money, but also be some of the people who are they're going to put people, formerly incarcerated people, who advocate for some people who you feel would be the best,
who you want to be in those positions.
Who are going to represent the community. Because remember, this is housing, this is job training, this is rehabilitation.
What I want you and I to be doing is essentially, I want us to be the class representative for the social and economic equity applicants. I want to be the one, in communication with them as a class, to say, we want this person in that position, and we want this person in that position, and. So, but that's the way you do that is by taking responsibility and coming together for the purposes of collective bargaining. Whereas in the past, it's been every man for himself, but now it's time.
Let me grab my piece of the pie and run.
And run from the other people trying to grab the piece of the pie, from the cops, from everybody.
From the social responsibility on a broader scale, and we're looking to change the whole paradigm and flip the script.
Number 4. The chairperson of the advisory board and the vice chairperson shall be elected from among the members of the advisory board by the members of such advisory board. So the chair and the vice chair they elect their own leaders. The vice chairperson shall represent the advisory board in the absence of the chairperson at all official advisory board functions. Fine. Number 5. The advisory board shall make recommendations to the Cannabis Control Board, the office and the legislature on cannabis and hemp cultivation, processing, distribution, transport, social and economic equity in the cannabis and hemp industries, criminal justice, public health and safety concerns, law enforcement related to cannabis and cannabis products, and on the testing and sale of cannabis and cannabis products. So a lot of their responsibilities are advisory, and so they're
interesting thing I noticed,
2 functions.
That in there was kind of slipped in criminal justice, because a lot of it is the retail, the monetization of this. But they're saying also remember, we're balancing out decades of disproportionately impactful negative effects. So part of what we're going to be doing ongoing is saying, okay, we still got to balance out the laws. Right. That's not going to happen because they waved the magic wand in 2023.
It's an ongoing process. It's not.
Part of what this advisory board is going to be doing is looking at that, in addition to looking at what happens to all the people who get out, where they're going to live, how they're going to work. Some of them are going to have drug problems that aren't marijuana. We're going to rehabilitate them. We're not just going to toss them out on the street and say good luck with that. And part of these funds is going to be invested in all of that. We're going to look at, okay, how did they end up becoming the class of people who ended up being disproportionately locked up? Why was their only opportunity to get into illegal activities? And how do we address that for this new upcoming generation with school, with job training, with other public education and public health issues? So this is a because as we often say in our conversations, it took generations for things to get this messed up. It's going to take generations to fix it. It's not
but you see the scope and power of the organization.
Yes.
This is not just a few, it's much more powerful, much larger scope than the liquor board, than the Department of Health, they're creating several organizations that are going to have the control of at least $300 million and probably closer to 1.2
billions. And here's the thing: let's not let this become another one of those well-intentioned but crappily implemented government things like housing and urban development or NYCHA, which ends up, let's build affordable housing, and then they just turn into ramshackle projects. And that's up to us. We have to be, and I often say, and I'm going to get on my I say this every episode, so here we go, here's that, maybe we'll put in a little thing where do Cornell's rant. The root of reparations is repair. And the responsibility for making the repair is us, the people who were affected by it. Right. The government's responsibility is to create the means and the mechanisms for the repairs to be made. It's not for them to make the repairs.
I would be happy enough if they just got out of the way. And they're going far above and beyond that here. But if they just got out of the way, that would be enough.
Yeah.
But but again, the responsibility is on the community itself, is what you're saying.
And there's a lot of stuff in this provision. If y'all sleep this, and that's why we're taking this time every weekend. If y'all sleep this, you can't say they didn't do it. What have they done? They're bending over backwards like a contortionist dancing in a limbo. And if you don't take advantage of all of this, my people, you got nobody to blame but yourselves.
I think this winter should really be the time that everybody in this business should be, I was hoping that I'd see more kind of interest and traction by now. That hasn't happened.
It's going to take time. Honestly speaking, what we're hoping for probably not going to be until next spring. When it's really going to bear fruit, kind of like with the cycles of the planet, because the weather's going to be getting warm again, people are going to be going out on the street again. But the winter time is time to till the soil, fertilize it, and get ready. And there's a lot of other groups out there. So maybe we're not. Now I'm not talking necessarily to the folks out there hustling on the groups. I'm talking to the naysayers, to the NGOs and the not-for-profit organizations, especially those of you who've been cynical about it. Reach out to us. Contact us to the information that's going to be in the description. If you're watching this on our website, just click the form to get in touch with us. Don't just sit here passively, man. We're just two guys. We're not going to do it all ourselves. Let's all get together, not just us forming to represent the class of people that we're looking to represent as the social equity applicants, but all you other interested entities. Let's all come together to make this happen. Okay, united we stand, and in unity our strength. Let's hold these suckers' feet to the fire and make them do what they say they're going to do on paper.
You also see that the advisory board is going to have the authority to give money to nonprofits and whatnot. So if you have any sort of community outreach ideas or nonprofit ideas, now is the time to incorporate and begin to think about soliciting the state.
And you're already 501c3s. You already know how to go through the grant process. Get in the front of the line. Get in the front of the line for this.
Okay, so moving on now. This last provision here I find a little questionable. The advisory board shall meet as frequently as its business may require. That's a little vague. The advisory board shall enact and from time to time may amend bylaws in relation to its meetings and the transaction of its business. Majority of the total number of voting members which the board would have, were there no vacancies, shall constitute quorum and shall be required for the board to conduct business. All meetings of the advisory board shall be conducted in accordance with the provisions of Article 7 of the Public Officers Law. All right, that's just procedure and how they're supposed to go about their decision-making process. Section 15, disposition of monies received for license fees. I don't think there's, that's really so much less than the funds they're going to receive from taxable revenue. So this is not that, not that significant, right? But it's here, so let's read it. The board shall establish a scale of application, licensing, and renewal fees based upon the cost of enforcing this chapter and the size of the cannabis business being licensed as follows. Essentially, they want the monies received from the licensing fees to pay for this article. This article.
Right.
For the appointment of the board.
Right.
Whatever.
So that the tax revenue is the tax revenue.
Right.
They're not paying for them out of the tax revenue.
Correct. The board shall charge each registered organization, license, and permittee a registration, licensure, or permit fee and renewal fee as applicable. The fees may vary depending upon the nature and scope of the different registration, licensure, and permit activities. I think the larger the operation, the more...
So I'm saying it's not a fixed price. So it's not going to be like, hey, we're going to make the price usuriously high to lock people out. It's going to be based on the size and structure of the business making the application.
And again, the social and economic equity applicants it's either going to be on a sliding scale or waived completely. The total fees assessed pursuant to this chapter shall be set at an amount that will generate sufficient total revenue to, at a minimum, fully cover the total cost of administering this chapter. Right, that's what I said a minute ago. Number 3, all registration and licensure fees shall be set on a scaled basis by the board, dependent on the size and capacity of the business, and for social and economic equity applicants, such fees may be assessed to accomplish the goals of this chapter. Again, it'll be on a sliding scale or waived completely. The board shall deposit all fees collected in the New York State Cannabis Revenue Fund established. We talked about that, right? Established pursuant to Section 99-2 of the State Finance Law. Section 16, violations of cannabis law or regulations. Okay, whereas before that was a subject of the criminal code.
Right.
You're getting arrested and you were going to Supreme Court. It's different now. Penalties and injunctions. Any person who violates, disobeys, or disregards any term or provision of this chapter, or of any lawful notice, order, or regulation pursuant thereto, for which a civil or criminal penalty is not otherwise expressly prescribed by law, shall be liable to the people of the state for a civil penalty of not to exceed $5,000 for every such violation. So even egregious violations, even selling to a kid, for instance.
Well, I mean, but that might be subject to criminal laws outside of this provision. That's like if you sold a kid cigarettes or booze.
You don't get arrested. You get hit with a fine,
okay.
I think,
well,
right?
Then,
you get hit. Well, I think it depends. I don't know if you ever saw Clerks, but they sell a 6-year-old kid a pack of cigarettes, so they get hit with like a $100,000 fine, as opposed to the $5,000 fine you get if you sell like a 16-year-old kid.
Right.
So yeah, it depends on. Look, I think the laws are generally reasonable. If you start doing things that's putting the public at risk, men with guns are going to take you away. But basically what they're saying is, if you violate the code at this point, you're dealing with a civil fine.
Yeah.
You're not dealing with criminal consequences. Okay. The penalty provided for in subdivision 1 of the section may be recovered by an action brought by the board in any court of competent jurisdiction. See, I thought it just would have been brought before their tribunals, but no, they can bring it. Basically, they're saying and there's a lot of courts that would share jurisdiction there.
Right.
So we'll see how that ends up playing out.
Right.
Is it Supreme Court? Is it? We'll see. Such civil penalty may be released or compromised by the board before the matter has been referred to the Attorney General. Okay. Do you know what the Attorney General is? You don't.
That's like the top lawyer of the state.
Correct, but they represent the state.
Right.
Not like the district attorney represents the state in a criminal action.
No, they represent the state of New York.
In civil actions and whatnot, right? So if you sue the state or if the state sues you, it's either it's a lawyer within the office of the Attorney General who's dealing with that, right? And any such penalty may be released or compromised, and any action commenced to recover the same may be settled and discontinued by the Attorney General with the consent of the board. So you can't just do whatever he wants to do. Number 4, it shall be the duty of the Attorney General upon the request of the board to bring an action for an injunction against any person who violates, disobeys, or disregards any term or provision of this chapter or of any lawful notice, order, of regulation pursuant thereto, provided, however, that the executive director shall furnish the Attorney General with such material, evidentiary matter, or proof as may be requested by the Attorney General for the prosecution of such action. Okay. So we've moved this from the district attorney to the Attorney General. That's who's in charge of this right now.
And it also says that the board has the weight and authority of the AG to throw at you.
Yes, right. That's right. That's right. Number 5, it is the purpose of this section to provide additional and cumulative remedies, and nothing herein contained shall abridge or alter rights of actions or remedies now or hereafter existing, nor shall any provision of this section nor any action done by virtue of this section be construed as a stopping the state, person, or municipalities in the exercising of their respective rights. So they can, if a municipality can enact like special rules and regulations, they can say, for instance, they as a municipality they might say, it's not a state law, but it's a municipal rule. You cannot sell cannabis within 100 feet of a school.
Right.
And if you do, it's not necessarily going to be referred to the Attorney General. They're going to handle that the way the municipality handles those types of violations.
Right. And these rules and these provisions don't override that.
Right. Now, Section 17 gets to the question of what I said before about any court of competent jurisdiction. Okay, formal hearings. So this seems to say that, they're still going to have their own tribunals, right? Formal hearings, notice, and procedure. Number 1, the board or any person designated by them for this purpose may issue subpoenas and administer oaths in connection with any hearings or investigation under or pursuant to this chapter, and it shall be the duty of the board and any person designated by them for such purpose to issue subpoenas at the request of and upon behalf of the respondent. So they can have hearings outside, not them themselves. No Supreme Court, no judge. Okay, number 2, the board and those designated by them shall not be bound. I said this at the beginning of the show. Shall not be bound by the laws of evidence in the conduct of hearing proceedings, but the determination shall be founded upon preponderance of evidence to sustain it. Preponderance of the evidence means more likely than not. You understand that?
Yeah.
Okay. 3, notice and right of hearing as provided in the State Administrative Procedure Act shall be served at least 15 days prior to the date of the hearing, provided that whenever because of danger to the public health, safety, or welfare it appears prejudicial to the interests of the people of the state to delay action for 15 days, the board may serve the respondent with an order requiring certain action or the cessation of certain activities immediately or within a specified period of less than 15 days.
Right. So it sounds like basically they're not going to just suddenly knock on your door at 2 o'clock in the morning without advance notice, unless it's something so egregious that they have to take immediate action.
That's correct. And then it goes into just various rules and regulations about the hearings and the types of hearings. And this is not something that the marijuana operator needs to really be mindful of. This is something that the attorney needs to. Well, however, I mean, if you're making less than $60,000 a year, which is I think where a lot of the marijuana operators are at, spending thousands of dollars on an attorney is not necessarily the most attractive thing. So you might end up appearing pro se, and these are relatively informal proceedings.
Right.
And that would be the time to dive a little more deeply into the specific rules and regulations of those hearings.
Right.
But as of right now, I think the point to understand right now is that the Office of the Cannabis Control Board will be establishing its own informal hearing process. Okay.
Right. Okay.
And we're approaching the end here. Section 18, ethics, transparency, and accountability. This really is just saying that they cannot have any interest at all.
I seem to have heard that before.
It's a section that just really spells
keep hammering that point, man.
But this, now we're going to get into legalese, and you'll understand why. I am going to read a little bit of legalese so that you understand why they put that in there. It's like they want to make sure that they include every possible permutation, and that nobody says, well,
How about?
No. Okay. No member of the board or officer or any member, deputy, assistant, inspector, or employee, or spouse or minor child of such member, officer, assistant, inspector, or employee thereof. Okay? That's legalese right there.
Yeah.
What that means is no one.
Nobody.
Shall have any interest, direct or indirect, either proprietary or by means of any loan, mortgage, or lien, or in any other manner, in or on any premise where adult use cannabis, medical cannabis, or cannabinoid hemp and hemp extract is cultivated, processed, distributed, or sold. Nor shall he or she have any interest, direct or indirect, in any business wholly or partially devoted to the cultivation, processing, distribution, sale, transportation, or storage of adult use cannabis. You cannot have any type, nor can your kids, nor can your wife.
Nor can an employee of your kids or your wife.
No.
Or
It's because they don't want or receive any commission or profit whatsoever, direct or indirect, from any person applying for or receiving any license or permit provided for in this chapter, or hold any other elected public office in the state or in any political subdivision. Okay.
They are really closing all the doors.
It's just not possible. It's like if you're on the board, if you're on the advisory board, if you're in the Office of Cannabis Management, you cannot have No, it's just that's your job. You know, it's like if you work in a bank and there's millions and millions of dollars, that's not your money. It looks like
but it's right there.
It looks like you're in control of it, but you're really not. You know, that's the state's money, that's the people's money, and yes, you're making decisions, but you're not being influenced by your own personal interests. Okay, and then we have 2 more sections, and then we're done.
Okay.
Section 19, Public Health and Education Campaign. The office, in consultation with the Commissioner of the Department of Health, Office of Addiction Services and Supports, and Office of Mental Health, shall develop and implement a comprehensive public health monitoring, surveillance, and education campaign regarding the legalization of adult-use cannabis and the impact of cannabis use on public health and safety. The public health and education campaign shall also include general education to the public about the cannabis law. So they're not just legalizing it and say let the chips fall where they may. They're carefully monitoring what is happening, and they're engaging the public in conversation about that so that everyone is as informed as possible.
And for decades, people have been saying, and rightfully so, that the issue, if you feel that drugs are a problem, it's treatment, not incarceration. And this is legally saying, yeah, you're right, we agree.
Yeah,
that's what we're going to do.
Basically. I mean, and I think they've been doing, the trend has been toward that recently anyway, not just with cannabis, but with all drugs. It's like when you get arrested for drugs now, the trend is processing people through drug court, at least for the first offense, you know, and trying to give them the opportunity to go to rehab instead of prison, etc.
And don't listen to Amy Winehouse.
Number 20, establish uniform policies and best practices. The office shall engage in activities with other states, territories, or jurisdictions in order to coordinate and establish uniform policies and best practices in cannabis regulations. Okay, I'm going to finish this, but I do want to comment on it. These activities shall prioritize coordination with neighboring and regional states and may include, but not be limited to, establishing working groups related to laboratory testing, product safety, taxation, road safety, compliance and adherence with federal policies which promote or facilitate cannabis research, commerce, and or regulation, and any other issues identified by the executive director. I think Section 20 positions New York State to establish itself as the dominant state in the marijuana industry. Yeah. That's what I think that provision does. It really puts them in a competitive position with the other states. Yeah.
And as you're saying that it's going to be the states banding together to override and overrule the federal prohibitions, and it sounds like that's what kind of backdoor.
I wouldn't use
saying.
That language. I don't want to see it as such an adversarial thing. I think it's in everyone's best interest.
Yes.
I think, and what I'm telling is like I don't think the Republicans should dig their heels in the sand anymore. I think they should release the brakes and work towards drafting the legislation themselves so that the Democrats don't have the only voice in the language of the statutes.
Because the boulder's rolling down the hill.
And the fat is in the fire, and there's really no stopping it at this point. Yeah. So,
but even for the federal government notwithstanding, I think that it makes sense to sort of get together and say, okay, Colorado, California, Washington State, you guys are ahead of us on this. Yeah. So let's compare notes.
Right.
What have you found out? What works? What doesn't work? What have you found in the years you've been doing it? What's the best way? So we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
We can look at yours, ask, oh, okay, yeah, we'll do it that way, and we'll do it that way, and we get to pick from the best of all of the states and say, okay, so that we don't start from zero and have to build it all up from nothing.
Right.
That makes sense.
So that's it for this week. Next week we are going to skip, like I said, the medical cannabis article and move directly into adult use cannabis, and that I think is probably going to be the most relevant provisions that we've gotten into.
That's why you're all here. Let's be real.
Yes. So, but everything that we've talked about, I think, was necessary to prepare you to understand what we're going to talk about next week. So, that is all, kids. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you all next week.